Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr Speaker, point of order.
Point of order, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Speaker, you recall earlier this year on the issue of questions, you raised that the difficulty for ministers answering if questions were, for example, couched as they are in question 1 there. So, accordingly, I drafted a question for the Prime Minister so that I would not offend your ruling. I don't have it flicked to the Minister of Finance, and I'm not asking for the Minister of Finance's views. I want to know, amongst the numerous statements the Prime Minister has made...
No order.
What you as Prime Minister?
Order. The member has been in this House long as I have, and he knows that the government, it's absolutely the prerogative of the government who they have to answer, which minister is to answer a question, so long as the question is not shifted away from a minister who could be the only person who could possibly hold the information that is being sought. This question asks, does he believe it's his responsibility, if it's his intention to sell strategic assets to obtain the best possible price? There's no reason why the Minister of Finance cannot answer that question, and that's why it's perfectly in order, and the member may now ask his question. Point of order, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
If that's the case, then one is forced to resort to the framing of a question like question 1. Otherwise, getting the Prime Minister to answer, and bear in mind, he never turns up here on Thursday to answer questions. Just 2 days a week he wants to be involved in democracy. If we're going to have that, well, look at the record. Look at the last 2 years' record.
Order, we're not going to have debate by way of point of order. That sort of thing went out of this place some years ago. We're not going to have that. The order, there will not be comment. Now look, the government, it has been for years the government's prerogative to have which minister answers questions laid down. It is within members' wit to draft questions to make sure they cannot be transferred from the Prime Minister. But where questions such that the standing orders allow them to be transferred, that is the government's prerogative. The member may ask his question. Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, I think, while I don't totally agree with the tone of the member's comments, I think it is a matter which will be referred to the Standing Orders Committee. Mr Speaker, I think he has highlighted a point. You have given us very good advice for when we are asking questions to the Prime Minister to try and give an indication of the area on which we are interested in following the Prime Minister's views through. The problem that we are facing, sir, is every time we give an indication that it is an area that the Prime Minister would prefer not to answer, it is transferred.
Order. The member was doing fine until that point. Expressing a view about why questions are transferred was not consistent with a point of order. The members must have short memories. They're not aware that this is a matter that's been a practice been in this House for years, that questions are transferred often from the Prime Minister to other ministers. There's nothing new about this. What the member says is perfectly right and proper. If members want to review the standing orders covering questions, the asking of questions, perfectly proper for the Standing Orders Committee to consider that, and that's right and proper. But for today, the question is down to the Minister of Finance, and I want the Right Honourable Member to ask his question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, does he believe it is his responsibility, if it is his intention to sell strategic assets, to obtain the best possible price?
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, the question I want to ask is whether when this was first put down, whether it was his responsibility was the words, or whether when it was to the Prime Minister. If so, in transferring it to the Minister, it has taken it away from being the Prime Minister's responsibility to the Minister of Finance, and therefore is incorrect.
No, order. Now look, we're not going to debate this matter any further. The way the question has been transferred is totally consistent with the standing orders. It's a matter, if the members are concerned about that, for the Standing Orders Committee. We will not debate it further by way of point of order today. The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Speaker, my question to the Minister of Finance. Does he believe it is his responsibility, if it is his intention to sell strategic assets, to obtain the best possible price? If not, why not?
The Right Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, if the member is referring to the government's proposed sale of a minority share in SOEs, then it is our responsibility to get the best price subject to the government's intentions for that sale, those sales, which include that the government will retain at least a 51% ownership, that Kiwi investors will be at the front of the queue, with an expectation that 85 to 90% of the companies will remain in New Zealand hands, and no one will be able to own more than 10% of the shares.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Supplementary question. Well, does he now stand by his comment of February 16 on state assets values that, quote, to quote him, it's just a guess, end of quotes?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, as has been explained, for the purposes of putting some numbers in the budget policy statement, Treasury chose a midpoint in the range of 5 to 7 billion, which is about as much certainty as we can provide at this time.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
If that is the case, why is the Minister of Finance ignoring the Crown Monitoring Agency's, the Crown Ownership Monitoring Unit's report on these assets, all of which are up for sale, where they have an assessment at 7.6 billion at 49%, and way above his 5 to 7 billion?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's a couple of different valuations that are available. One is the board's valuations, and the other is independent commercial valuation. And I think the difference in the numbers that the member is looking at is that the Board of Solid Energy have a considerably higher valuation for solid energy than the independent commercial valuation. Apart from that, they're fairly similar, and of course those valuation issues would need to be resolved before the Crown sold any shares.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Sell what?
Order.
You know,
To order the member.
Point of order.
Point of order. The Right Honourable
I'm very happy to oblige by your ruling, but if Mr. Smith here, who's famous for giving his brother big contracts on
the member. Order. Now look, there'll be silence from elsewhere in the House and the Right Honourable gentleman resume his seat. Order. I don't want that sort of carry on. Unlike previous parliaments, it is now possible for members to interject while questions are being asked. It is unwise, though, if they don't wish to those interjections be picked up on. It's unhelpful to the order of the House. Now, I would appreciate the member, though, just asking his question. He doesn't need to respond to some of those unnecessary interjections. The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Given the value of Mighty River Powers in the order of 3.8 billion, will the Minister of Finance undertake to this House that if the National Party sells Mighty River, they will do so for the expert-assessed value, not at a discount price their mates can afford?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the member means by our mates, Kiwi mums and dads, the 2 million New Zealanders who are in Kiwi Saver, then of course we want to make sure that they get reasonable value out of a share sale, because that is who will mostly be buying them.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Does the Minister of Finance understand that the so-called mates called Kiwi mums and dads already own those assets? Or is he playing la-la land on this issue, given that the Treasury, his department, has advised him that within 10 years they will be in foreign ownership?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not been the advice from Treasury. And with respect to the valuation, I mean, the member's raising a reasonable question, and that is at some point closer to the sale of these shares, the Crown will need to come to a view about what value it expects would be a fair value for the shares. We're not at that point yet, but it will be somewhere around, in the case of Mighty River Power, likely to be somewhere around what he's suggesting. There are other views that it might be worth quite a bit more than the current book value because of low interest rates around the world. We've yet to see.
Question number 4. Supplementary question, the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister. My question is to the Minister has he seen any reports dated in 2008 of a political party wanting to have the mixed ownership model applying to Kiwi Bank? And which political party was it?
Point of order. A point of order is being called. The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
The very obvious response to that inappropriate question is that Minister...
Order! The member will resume his seat right now. Order. House, just because a member in the House doesn't like a question being asked, the question is in order. It relates to strategic assets and the sale of strategic assets. The Right Honourable Prime Minister asked about whether the Minister had received certain reports. The Honourable Bill English to answer it.
Well, Mr Speaker, if I wasn't sure which political party it was when the Prime Minister asked that question, I am now. And I think it was New Zealand First who advocated mixed ownership model for Kiwi Bank in the 2008 election.
Question. Order. Point of order. Point of order. The Right Honourable Winston
Mr.
Peters.
Speaker, it's patently obvious that he has received a report.
Order.
Which was my
The
point of
member will
order.
resume his seat immediately. Now, if the member does that again, he'll be leaving the House, because that is not a point of order. Points of order relate to the proceedings of this House, not to whether that member happens to like or dislike an answer or anything said in this House. That does not provide the grounds for a point of order to be raised and the business of this House to be interrupted. And I'm deadly serious. The member will cease that abuse of the point of order process. Question number 4, Hone Harawira. It had better be a different point of order. The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr. Speaker, there have been countless rulings that says that the Minister is not responsible for another party's statements or policies.
Order.
That's why I'm asking
Order.
you.
The member is now starting to dispute my ruling, and if he's not careful, he'll be leaving the House. Hone Harawira, question number 4.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker, tēnā tātou katoa.